Conference with Governor Tim Walz, where he will formally announce he is not running for a third term.
It is a decision that comes amid growing scrutiny, both within our state and nationally, over fraud allegations. The governor made the announcement this morning in a long statement saying while he has every confidence that he would win a third term, he's decided to, quote, step out of the race and let others worry about the election while I focus on the work. The governor went on to say he's dropping his bid, quote, with zero sadness and zero regrets.
The reaction, as you might imagine, has been nonstop since the news came out this morning. DNC Chair Ken Martin released a statement saying he is grateful for the governor's unwavering commitment to Minnesota. Martin went on to thank Governor Walz for, quote, carrying the torch, knowing when to pass it on, and always putting Minnesota first. The Minnesota DFL also issued a statement this morning saying they respect the governor's decision not to seek a third term. They go on to say the Minnesota DFL will continue to focus on delivering results and running a fair, trusted process that earns the confidence of grassroots activists, candidates, and voters across Minnesota.
On the other side of the aisle, the Republican Party of Minnesota also reacting this morning, calling for change and saying, quote, Governor Tim Walz leaves behind a legacy Minnesotans won't soon forget. We'll have more of that Republican reaction. Let's listen into the governor right now.
Like many Minnesotans, I have to tell you, I was glad to turn the page on 2025. It was an extraordinarily difficult year for our state, and it ended on a particularly sour note. For the last several years, an organized group of criminals have sought to take advantage of this state's generosity. And even as we make progress in the fight against the fraudsters, we now see an organized group of political actors seeking to take advantage of a crisis. I don't want to mince words here. Donald Trump and his allies in Washington and in St. Paul and online want to make our state a colder, meaner place. They want to poison our people against each other by attacking our neighbors. And ultimately, they want to take away much of what makes Minnesota the best place in the country to raise a family. They've already begun trying to withhold funds that were meant to help families afford child care, and they have no intention of stopping there. Make no mistake, we should be concerned about fraud in our state government. We cannot effectively deliver programs and services if we can't earn the public's trust. That's why over the past few years, we've made systemic changes in the way we do business. We've gone to the legislature time and time again to get more tools to combat fraud. We've fired people who weren't doing their jobs. We've seen people go to jail for stealing from our state. We've cut off whole streams of funding in partnership with the federal government, where we saw widespread criminal activity. We've put new locks on the doors of our remaining programs, and we've hired a new head of program integrity to make sure that those locks can't be broken. All across this state, Minnesotans are hard at work on this problem. Advocates, administrators, investigators are on the front lines defending the integrity of our state's programs, and I want to give a very heartfelt thank you to all of them. There is more to do. A single taxpayer dollar wasted on fraud should be intolerable. And while there's a role to play for everyone, from the legislature to prosecutors to insurance companies to local and county government, the buck does stop with me. My administration has been taking fast, decisive action to solve this crisis. We'll win the fight against the fraudsters. But the political gamesmanship we're seeing from Republicans is only making that fight harder. We've got Republicans here in the state legislature playing hide and seek with potential whistleblowers. We've got conspiracy theorist right-wing YouTubers breaking into our daycares, demanding access to our children. We've got the President of the United States demonizing our Somali neighbors and wrongfully confiscating funds that Minnesotans rely on. It's disgusting and it's dangerous. Republicans are playing politics with the future of this state. It's shameful, and I've said it before, and I will continue to say it. We welcome ideas from anyone, in any party, from any walk of life, who wants to help us continue to stay ahead of these criminals. And we welcome the involvement of the federal government. I am grateful to the career professionals at the U.S. Attorney's Office and the FBI who have been helping us fight this fight for years. But I cannot abide the actions of the political leadership in Washington. These opportunists are willing to hurt our people to score cheap points. They and their allies have no intention of helping us solve this problem, and every intention of trying to profit off of it. Which brings me to this. 2026 is an election year. Election years have a way of ramping up the politics at a time when we simply can't afford more of that in Minnesota. In September, I announced that I would seek a historic third term as Minnesota's governor, and I have every confidence that if I gave it my all, we would win the race. But as I reflect on this moment with my family and my team over the holidays, I came to the conclusion that I can't give a political campaign my all. Every minute that I spend defending my own political interest would be a minute I can't spend defending the people of Minnesota against the criminals who prey on our generosity and the cynics who want to prey on our differences. So I've decided to step out of this race, and I'll let others worry about the election while I focus on the work that's in front of me for the next year. I'm passing on this race with zero sadness and zero regret. I did not run for this job to have the job. I ran for the job to do the job. Minnesota faces enormous challenges this year, and I refuse to spend a single minute doing anything other than rising to meet this moment. Minnesota has always come first and always will. That's what I believe servant leadership demands of me. As an optimist, I'll hold out some hope that my friends on the other side of the aisle will consider what servant leadership demands of them in the moment. We can work together to combat against the criminals. We can work together to rebuild the public's trust and make our state stronger. But make no mistake about it, if Republicans continue down the path of abusing power, smearing entire communities, and running their own fraudulent game at the expense of Minnesotans, I will fight back with everything that I have. I am absolutely confident a Democratic and a DFLer will hold this seat come November. I'm confident that I'll find ways to contribute to the state that I love long after next January. But there'll be time to worry about all that later. Today, I'm proud of the work we've done to make Minnesota America's best place to live and raise kids. From our new paid leave policy to our child tax credit to our school lunch programs feeding every single child. And I'm doubly proud of the incredible team we put together to make this vision a reality. I want to take a moment to thank every member of my staff, to every single state employee who has been part of this fight. Now more than ever, I need you on the job. I need you to help work together to tackle the important work in front of us. And most of all, I want Minnesotans to know how grateful I am for the opportunity to serve this state, for the privilege that I have been given to serve in this office. I'm on the job. I'm focused on making sure that we stay America's best place to live and raise kids. No one will take that away from us. I'm proud of the way we treat our neighbors. I'm proud of the way that we welcome people to this state. I'm proud of the way that we innovate. And I'm proud of the way that we are optimists for the future. No one's taking this away from us. Not the fraudsters, certainly not this president, not on my watch. Tomorrow, I'll be back with you. I'll give you an update on America's best paid family medical leave program that is now a week into it, and at that time, I'll take all your questions. Thank you all.
Thank you, Press. I'll be back tomorrow. Thanks, folks. I'll have more tomorrow. Appreciate it. Thank you.
We've been listening in at the state capitol right now to Governor Tim Walz announcing he will not seek a third term as governor, not taking any questions today from the media, but saying he will answer some questions, and there are lots of them tomorrow. Largely, Rena, sticking to the script that he issued this morning, the statement basically laying the blame at the foot of Donald Trump and Republicans and saying because they want to turn this into a political game, it's just not feasible for him to continue with his election campaign. Pretty stunning turn of events as he stated he just announced in September that he would run for that third term as governor of Minnesota. So just a few months later announcing he is now out of the race, largely because of the national attention on all of the fraud in Minnesota.
Bringing up a lot of questions then, was this his own decision? Let's bring in political analyst Brian McClung now to run down some of this. We have lots of questions about this. Is this his choice? He's making it sound like it is. He says he could have won a third term. He believes that. but is stepping out of the race to let other people concentrate on the election while he concentrates on fraud. What are your thoughts on how this all went down?
Well, I think right now it's really questionable whether or not Governor Walz would have been reelected to a third term. I mean, for starters, no Minnesota governor has been elected to a third four-year term in the history of the state. So even attempting to run for that was a big lift. You know, I worked for Governor Pawlenty, who served 2 terms, decided not to run for a third term, considered it certainly, but then ultimately felt like it was time to move on. I think there was some sense, even when Governor Walz announced in September that he was seeking that third term, that his heart wasn't fully in it. It took him a long time to come to that decision. Of course, it was an extraordinarily difficult summer and early fall in Minnesota with the assassination of Speaker Hortman and her husband, close friends of Governor Walz and his wife, of the shooting at Annunciation School and Church in August. So it was a really difficult stretch leading into that decision. I think Governor Walz kind of maybe felt like that's why he needed to run. He needed to be in that fight, particularly on gun violence prevention. But these issues around fraud were just not going away. It was not tenable. And every time the state agencies and the U.S. Attorney's Office are going to uncover more fraud, and there is more to come. Yes. There is no question that we are not done learning about the extent of fraud in Minnesota. It was going to come back to Governor Walz over and over and over again, and it was going to make it very difficult for him to try to campaign on anything else in this election year.
Do you think it was his decision, or do you think there was a lot of pressure placed on him to step out of this race? We know he met with Senator Amy Klobuchar yesterday.
You know, something like this, you've got to think ultimately was the governor's decision, right? You're talking about somebody who's a 12-year member of Congress, a 2-term governor of Minnesota. The party and his colleagues are going to give him a lot of leeway to make up his mind. But I'm sure that there were many people saying to him, are you sure this is tenable? And if you're on the ballot and all of these fraud allegations keep piling up, what is that going to do to the rest of the ticket? What's that going to do to Democratic chances in the Minnesota legislature or that open U.S. Senate race? So I think there were certainly Democrats that were saying to Governor Walz, you need to reconsider this. You need to think about it. But at the end of the day, I got to think it was his call.
So what does this mean now for the race? Should I've seen a lot of talk about how this is actually a good thing for the DFL, and GOP supporters were celebrating, but they're saying, hold on now, because if Amy Klobuchar runs for that seat, it's likely game over in this race, and Walz maybe would have lost. You
know, it's never game over, though, and this is Minnesota, and our politics are always weird, right? We ended up with a tie in our state House of Representatives. We've elected former SNL cast members to the U.S. Senate and professional wrestlers as governor. I mean, we do wild things in Minnesota. So I don't think it's game over regardless of who the candidate is. That said, Amy Klobuchar is the most popular politician in the state. She's, got a track record. She was first elected in 2006 when Governor Pawlenty, my old boss, was reelected governor. So she is a known quantity. She works hard. People know her. And I think she would for sure clear the Democratic field. But I think Republicans have a number of solid candidates running for governor. So I expect, the voters are going to look at this and say, can we really trust any Democrat to come in and solve this after what's happened over the last decade or so with these things? And keep in mind that these fraud issues are not just a Tim Walz problem. This started under Mark Dayton with the child care program, and we saw allegations and people who were arrested and convicted back then. So this has been going on a long time, and like I said, we're going to see more of it in the coming months.
Do you think that Amy Klobuchar gets a pass in the sense that she is not connected to our state politics, so she is a Democrat that did not have anything to do with the fraud? Does that give them a leg up?
It helps her, right? I mean, because she's been outside of that. She's, been in Washington, D.C. So, yeah, I think that helps position her relative to, for example, if Lieutenant Governor Peggy Flanagan wanted to run for governor. Now, of course, she's in the Senate race right now for the open seat that Tina Smith is leaving. But if she were to try to run for governor, these allegations and issues would dog her all the way through, as well as part of the administration. So for sure, Senator Klobuchar coming in from an outside perspective, gives her a little bit of a clean slate. But I think you're going to see voters just broadly questioning whether maybe it's time to change things up in Minnesota. We've had Democrat governors for the last 16 years with Mark Dayton and Tim Walz. Maybe it's time to have a different set of eyes, a different party in office there to clean things up. So I think that's part of what we're going to see during the campaign over the course of this year.
Well, because Republicans have not won a statewide race in almost 2 decades, it would seem, I think people perceive Minnesota as a deeply blue state. Would you say that's true or not?
No, because you have to keep in mind, again, the Minnesota House, 67 Republicans, 67 Democrats. The Senate, 34 Democrats, 33 Republicans, 1 seat difference in the entire legislature. Our congressional delegation, 4 Republicans, 4 Democrats. So on a whole, it's a very closely divided state. What happens is that in these off-year elections, in the governor's races in particular, Democrats do a better job of running up the numbers in Minneapolis and St. Paul and the surrounding suburbs, and in places like Duluth, where they have kind of core constituencies. So Republicans are going to have to nominate somebody and do a better job of winning back, especially in the outer suburbs, and then coming into the second and third ring suburbs. Places like Eagan, Eden Prairie, Woodbury, places that used to regularly elect Republicans that haven't over those last 20 years. And if they can find the candidates who can appeal and win in those places, then I think Republicans can win statewide.
Let's just,
go ahead.
Let's just say it is Amy Klobuchar. She wins the election, let's say. Then we have 2 Senate seats, one that just went up for election. We don't know who's going to win that one. Then she gets to appoint, if she becomes governor, that second seat.
Yeah, so we have the
Lots
potential.
of dominoes. We're speculation right now.
A lot of turnover, right? I mean, you're already starting off with, right now, with Governor Walz not running again, an open U.S. Senate seat and an open governor's race in the same election cycle. So that alone is very rare.
Huge.
That your 2 major statewide offices are open seats. So that creates, the atmosphere for some wild politics. And then, like you say, if Amy Klobuchar is elected governor, that opens up her U.S. Senate seat. And under Minnesota law, the person who appoints to fill that seat temporarily is the governor. So it would be Amy Klobuchar deciding who her short-term replacement would be, who would run again in 2 years. And that's fraught with issues. In 1978, Republicans won all of the statewide races when then Governor Wendy Anderson resigned, then was appointed by his lieutenant governor, who became governor, Rudy Perpich, to the U.S. Senate, and people felt like he appointed himself to the Senate, and that didn't stick well with a lot of people, and so Republicans benefited from that mood. So I do think that Amy Klobuchar, anybody in that kind of situation, is going to be very careful and thoughtful about who they might appoint to that seat, because they don't want it to be perceived that they're self-benefiting in some manner,
and so
with something like that.
These rumors that she's just going to appoint Tim Walz to her seat, you think are?
Well, I think that's very dangerous politically. I mean, that would set you up for a couple of years from then, Tim Walz running for re-election against a backlash of people saying, oh, he cut some kind of deal
crowned,
where he decided he wasn't going to run and Senator Klobuchar could move in and then he gets her old job. I mean, that would be
fraught.
Not popular. That would be fraught with concern.
Who would you put in the top 2 or 3 that you think might be named?
Well, I think you have to kind of think about some of the folks who have a statewide constituency and appeal in the Democratic Party already. So right now you already have a primary for the open U.S. Senate seat between Lieutenant Governor Peggy Flanagan and Congresswoman Angie Craig. Both of them formidable candidates, both of them I think running really strong campaigns. But only one of them is going to end up on the general election ballot. So could the other one be a potential appointee? But would that be perceived oddly because that person would have lost, presumably, in the primary election? You also have some of the members of Congress who I think would be appealing to Democrats. People like Congresswoman Kelly Morrison, who's relatively new in the western suburban congressional district, but served in the legislature prior to that and has a lot of friends and support in the Democratic Party. So those are a couple of people that come to mind as you already start to speculate on that next future thing.
And I just have one more question, then we're going to go to Danny. But when you look at the Republican Party in Minnesota and you see someone like Mike Lindell at the top of the ticket, and there's so many candidates outside of him, Trump kind of gave him a nod, not an endorsement. Do you think the Republican Party is organized enough? Do you think they will all coalesce behind one candidate when it comes down to it? Or is there going to be a fairly fractured Republican Party going into this?
Well, we'll see. I think the question is, are the delegates to the state Republican convention, who are, the truest believers, right, the kind of the hardest of the hardcore, are they more interested in kind of ideological purity? Or at this stage, are they interested in winning? And are they willing to back a candidate who might not be the most conservative choice, but is maybe more likely to win in November? And if that's the case, then I think they lean towards candidates like Speaker Lisa Demuth or State Representative Kristen Robbins or some of these other people who are established, solid conservatives, but might have taken votes that didn't align every single time with some of these values or beliefs, as opposed to a Mike Lindell who's never held elected office, so he can just kind of come in and say whatever he wants and run like that. The track record of the Republican delegates has not been towards electability. I mean, they have mostly just gone for the person they thought was the truest, purest conservative. And if you do that in a state like Minnesota, you're not going to win statewide. So that's going to be the question. And then the secondary question is, let's say the party convention endorses somebody like a Mike Lindell or somebody who's kind of outside of the mainstream. Can a more mainstream centrist Republican win in a primary? And that's never happened, right? So there's no track record of that, but there's a first time for all of these things. And as we've seen, this is already a pretty unsettled election year in Minnesota. So we'll see how that goes. But I would, tell my fellow Republicans, like, this is as good a chance as you're going to have to win statewide races. So think long and hard about the types of candidates that could do that.
You think they have a better chance now that he dropped out? Or do you think it's a harder struggle for Republicans now that he dropped out?
I think in some ways it's harder, but I don't think that it takes these issues off the table, or this isn't a conversation that Minnesotans are going to want to have.
Right.
So I think that's the real question is, yes, Tim Walz is not on the ballot, but all of the things that he and other Democrats have done and have allowed to happen in Minnesota, that's still on the ballot.
Still on the ballot.
All right. Thanks so much, Brian. We always appreciate your insight. Danny Spiewak is our chief political reporter. He has been covering, it has been weird, wild, Brian's description of our political climate in the last few years. He's seen a lot. But Danny, what a day today at the state capitol, an absolutely stunning to some and others expected announcement. What kind of reaction are you getting there at the state capitol?
Well, as the phrase goes, never a dull moment, especially here at the Minnesota State Capitol over the last, year and a half with everything that has happened here in the state. But this news conference was short. I wouldn't even call it a news conference. Governor Walz came out, read a short statement, and then took no questions from the press. So the statement that we saw circulating this morning officially from his office announcing that he won't seek a third term for re-election in 2026, that's all we got today. The governor walked out without answering any questions, so we don't know if he received any pressure from allies to leave the race or how he came to his decision. We also do not know the status of Senator Amy Klobuchar and what conversations Governor Walz may have had with her and what her intentions may be for running for the governor's seat. So a lot of uncertainty from that aspect. We're told he's going to be doing another news conference tomorrow where he will take questions, so there may be more clarity that comes out of that. But basically his argument here today was he accused Republicans of politicizing the fraud issue, saying that it had become a distraction on the campaign trail. He says he's still confident that the DFL can hold the governor's seat, but that he's deciding to step aside due to what he was calling the politicization of the issue of fraud. But what's very interesting is seeing the swift reaction from the many GOP candidates who are seeking the office on the Republican side. Basically, all of them with very similar statements saying that if it's not Walz, it's somebody else who they're trying to tie to fraud in the state. Of course, that is harder to do if it ends up being Senator Amy Klobuchar because she's in the U.S. Senate, she's in Washington, as Rena, you mentioned earlier, not involved directly in state politics. But Republicans with that messaging, that is going to continue. Just because Governor Walz isn't in the race doesn't mean they're going to be dropping the issue of fraud, which has really been central to basically almost all of their campaigns, whether it's Speaker Demuth, Representative Robbins, Kendall Qualls, many others. Back to you.
Well, Danny, we know you have a lot to cover, a lot of people to get a hold of, talking about all that speculation with Klobuchar and what happens now in the Senate race. So a lot going on. We'll check back in with you a little bit later on. Thanks so much for your coverage. We appreciate it.